Thanks very much. Anyway, I'm going to change the tone quite a lot. You're all presenting about the evidence about what's going on and adaptation and mitigation and really important work that's being done. I'm going to flip to the other side of all of this and say, well, how does this look through the policy lens? Next slide, Alex, please. I hope you've got the slides printed out so you can look. There's quite a lot of writing in mine so that you can look at it. But I've got some key thoughts that I really want to plant into the seminar. Essentially, let me just remind you why the US and the UK are right to be talking to each other, why we're right to be meeting, is because the US got an overproduction problem, not under, but the UK has an underproduction. It imports 50% of its food. The UK is in a very strange place, beginning to say it doesn't want food from the European Union and it wants more from the US. So the policymakers are getting very interested in our discussion, but they don't really get sustainability. I don't think they do. We've done a lot, and people in the room have been heroes and heroines in educating policymakers, but most policymakers just don't get it. They see this as dangerous long-term stuff. They don't see it as now. And yet we know, the bottom 5 bullet points, that food and farming are these major factors in ecosystems, in employment, in health, politics, and society. And it's that mix which is, I think, stopping us get somewhere on ecosystems. Next slide, please. Just to remind you the specifics of the UK and the US. The US overproduces food. It's a big food exporter. I've got the latest figures from you, literally a week old, from USTR, showing you the sorts of products that the US is selling around. In Walt Willett's and my terms from the Eat Lancet, I was an Eat Lancet commissioner with Walt. The good news is tree nuts that the US, but actually when you look environmentally, the almond crops of the US have really big environmental problems associated with them, and soybeans, well, I don't need to tell you. The US is basically imports fruit and vegetables in huge amounts from the south of the European Union, but exports basically whiskey and cheese and processed foods. Next slide, please. So food is a trade issue. A critical issue here. I've got 6 agri-food policy problems now, and this is the first. I think our problem is that sustainability, what we're discussing here these next 2 days, is trying to jostle into very crowded space. I sat in my study at home trying to think, there's a big picture of the US. I pulled out just some big points in the history over the last 150 years, in the UK the last 200 years. Food has been big politics, is my point, and bits of incremental change have come in to alter the food policies of both countries. I've put those in. In Britain, obviously, we're splitting from the Common Agricultural Policy. We're not quite sure where we are, but we've got this very powerful Climate Act, 2008, 12 years old. I was part of the government's Sustainable Development Commission that helped get that in. The food industry doesn't quite know what to do about it. It's kicking it into the touch. We'll sort this by 2050. Next slide, please, Alex. Problem 2. I think there is a fundamental difficulty from a policy perspective that the more evidence people like all of you in the room pile out, it just adds into this problem. There is a huge gap between evidence, policy, and reality. The evidence of food and unsustainability is huge and daily getting stronger, but the policy response to that is weak. It's because we're locked in, both in the US and the UK, into what in the policy world we call productionism. The assumption that both the UK and the US hammered out in the 1940s and pushed through the FAO and all the UN systems, as well as a member state level, which is just produce more food and it'll feed the world and everything will be okay. And actually at one level it's worked. But in the last 15 years, we've got, actually even earlier than that, in the UN system at the global level, we started getting policy changes 25, 30 years ago, and obviously significantly 5 years ago with Paris and the SDGs at the UN level. But the reality is the data, we've just had 3 talks showing that very elegantly, and there'll be more in the next 2 days, that the problems continue to rise. So in red letters at the bottom, I'm gently saying to us, is just shouting louder about more and more evidence working? And my answer is no, and I'd like to hear what yours is. Next slide, please. Agri-problem 3. Part of the reason our evidence is not getting through because we're up against very powerful forces. You won't know this study, but it was hugely important in my world, a vast mapping exercise of where the policy and the power in the world's food system by country was done. And essentially, we, the rich world, are the people who dominate it. It's not just about populations. The Netherlands, for example, is very powerful in that. But essentially what we've got is post-farm industries have been and become the power blocks of this. And the dynamics of that, I probably more than any of you, I think, spend my working life really looking at the food chain, not just on the farm. I'm an ex-farmer, I'm very interested in it, but what happens after? All the money and the power are later. In my country, for example, Uber, Deliveroo, these delivery companies are now taking almost as much money as farming is out of what consumers spend. Next slide, please. I'm giving you some examples. You can look at these later. On the right-hand side is the British entire food system. You can look at it at the top, 66 million people. In the ring, halfway down, or 2/3 of the way down, farming. Farming gets about 10 billion gross value added, 10 billion pounds out of 125 billion pounds. It gets, in other words, about 7%, 7.5% of the value. On the left, I've broken those up and made them more open for you. You can see who's got the money. And at the bottom, you'll see actually the power fight is between food manufacturing, food and drink retailing, and the new kid on the block, catering, which is actually overtaking them. Something very different is going on in the US, but not that different. Next slide, please, Alex. Actually, what this means is, we'll come to the US in a moment, is that farming, both in the US and the UK, is basically relies on subsidy. It doesn't totally survive on it. And these are the figures that I pulled out from my book, which is why I'm not with you, over the last 25 years. You can see the red line going across the middle is actually the taxpayer's subsidy. In many years, farming's total income, these are what the British government calls the TIF figures, total income from farming. You can see remove the subsidy, and actually British farming, that half of it goes into loss. Next slide, please. If we look at the US, I've not done exactly the same because the USDA has stopped producing the very useful sequence we used to call the food dollar series. The US farms basically take about 12% of every dollar that the US consumer spends on food. They get a huge amount of subsidies, like Britain, $22 billion last year. Conservation, if you like, ecosystems, gets very little of that. And I put those figures at the bottom from EWG. And you can see on the right, I've put the food dollar series in the new format it does. Next slide, please. I think this is a very big problem. We're not really sure when we talk to policymakers, what do we mean by food security? I'm someone who's worked for 25 years trying to unpick this meaning. And I've come to the conclusion we've almost made food security as a concept not meaningless, but like cotton wool. It can be pulled to mean anything for anyone. And alongside all these concepts and discourses that I put in red here, which cut across it, it needs more than a 10-minute talk to pull out of those. But if I was with you, as we had a glass of wine or a glass of something healthy, I would be saying, well, where do you stand? What do you mean? Is resilience the issue? Tim Benton and I have talked for years about the capacity of food systems to bounce back in the classic model of ecology, but that's not what the food industry means when it talks about food risks. And it's not what popular movements mean when they talk about food sovereignty. And it's certainly not what we mean when we talk about food defense or food self-security. So there's a bit of unpacking of meaning here. Not about numbers, it's about meaning. Next slide, please. This is problem number 5. I think this is a fundamental problem, probably more than some of you. I'm sure you're all very well read. I know the people I know, they're extremely well read. But this is basically going back to Malthus. What is farming and land for? And actually what we're all doing is making it more complicated. Agri-food is now part of what I call a multi-world. We cannot understand the agri-food system, i.e. both farming and off-farming, without looking at multi-level, multi-sector, multi-actor, and this multifunctionality. And even you, wonderful scientists and number crunchers, don't actually just use one set of indicators, even within environmentalist aspects. I'm going to come back to this. And one of the problems that means is when we start discussing with policymakers, they don't get it, or they drown in it, and we don't have clear messages. And as I put at the bottom, there are too few interdisciplinary ag assessments. Obviously, IPCC is stunning on that. Eat Lancet, I think, I'm biased because I was part of it, was a very, very important, very complicated. Marco is there from it as well, and Dave Tillman, Mike Clark, all of you. It was complicated enough just putting together public health, nutrition, and the ecosystem. But we didn't talk about culture, about the economy, about people's aspirations, and so on. And yet those are what the politicians deal with. Next slide, please. Click it again, Alex, because it should start putting it in some extra bits in. Yeah, go click, 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 and the red one should come up. Stop. Whoa, go back one. This is just to remind you, Walt and Dave and everyone, Dave Tillman knows this one only too well. In the Lancet, we calculated, how if one was to develop land use and the food system to protect ecosystems and not add to more damage just in land and water and the seas, we have to dramatically alter what is grown. Now, this is a message politics gets, and policymakers get it, and it achieves massive resistance, as we know only too well. Next slide, please.
Hey, Tim.
This is very interesting stuff.
Can you hear me, Tim?
Can I just go click, click? Alex, go click, click.
Thanks, Tim.
Go on. Next, let's just end with that one. Essentially, where we've just missed one slide, which is important, you can look at it. Essentially, what I've been saying is the policy evidence gap is very big. Changing policies requires more than just shouting louder. We know about the large footprints and the difficulties. The problem is that we haven't actually got a complex understanding and message to the policymakers about what we mean by sustainability. And the last slide, Alex, gives a version of what can be done about it. That sort of message politicians get in about 2 minutes. That food is about juggling these things together. If we have messages that put this together, then we start engaging with the policymakers. That's what won productionism in the 1940s.
Thank you, Tim.